What if I told you that the easiest way to make life and business feel easier is to actually want things to be hard? When we're trying to achieve big things, there will inevitably be obstacles. However, if we see the purpose behind them, then all of a sudden, this is actually a wanted part of the process. It's not just a setback or a frustration point. Like, okay, great, I get to have this here. This is a gift. When challenges are expected and welcomed, then they stop adding pressure and they actually add motivation because you get jazzed by it. Great, this is exactly what I was looking for. Today, we're going to be talking about why craving challenges can make obstacles disappear. And it's a very powerful mindset trick that I actually learned in special operations. So one of my most vivid memories from special ops was during advanced unit boot camp. And this was probably week 4 or 5. And we were already sleep deprived. We were already tired. And then in the middle of the night, all of a sudden we heard a bunch of flashbang grenades and we saw smoke and all that kind of jazz. And there was, it was basically a ritual where a lot of the trained operators who were already qualified from the unit would come during this point, advanced unit boot camp, and kind of like, not a hazing, but they would take you for one of those marches where you had like a stretcher, you carry sandbags and all that. And it was a lot of energy in the air because they were all amped and you could tell it was something they enjoyed doing as well. But what I remember most about it was that they kept yelling at us, "You fucking love this. You guys are animals. You fucking love this." And apologies for my cursing. But the interesting part about it is they were trying to instill a way of thinking, a mindset into all of us that theoretically we should despise this. You know what I mean? Like, we're just trying to get through boot camp. We're sleep deprived already, and they're already like crashing on our sleep in the middle of the night. Everyone's foggy. Theoretically, we should really not want to do this. But when you come with that attitude of like, oh, why is this here? This is frustrating. Then obviously it's going to get even worse. But they instill the mindset in us, be like, you love this. You guys fucking love this. This is what you do. You guys are animals. And it was a very interesting lesson about when you actually think about yourself as someone who wants the challenges, who leans into them, all of a sudden when they do inevitably come, it's like, oh, okay, this is it. This is what I wanted. I want to get better. So today I want to talk about how to instill that in a very practical level. And how do you combine that with external goals so that you're also achieving things and not just, doing things for hard things for the sake of doing hard things. With that said, Alex, welcome to the pod, man.
Thank you, Itamar. Pleasure to be here and looking forward to getting into this topic.
Cool. Any initial thoughts before we dive in?
My initial thought was how to avoid unnecessarily making things more difficult. So how do you, like, where's the perfect balance point? Where's the Goldilocks zone of embracing adversity? That's something which is personally interesting to me, but no other initial thoughts other than that.
Yeah, it's a great one. So I think we're actually going to dive into it a little bit later. I have that as part of the framework that I want to share, like to actually do the strategic layer on top of this. But first, kind of want to talk about the core idea and how to think about it. And this is something that I have to learn on myself. Like, even despite, my time in the military and special ops and the undercover work, this was still a lesson that I hadn't really learned until I was really competing in jiu-jitsu. So with this, I think one of the best ways to be able to do challenging things and to make them feel easier is to have some kind of target. It's the reason why you're doing it. For example, like I spoke to my niece. I'm here visiting family, and I spoke to my niece. She's 10 years old, and she is the swimming champ of Israel for her ages. And I asked her, like, oh, are you going to do this and this? And she said, yes. And I was like, oh, but how do you deal with the challenges? And it was surprising to hear from a 9-year-old say this, but she was like, I think about what I want, the goal I want to achieve, and how this will help it. And I was like, this is great. But it's exactly that. When we have a goal in mind, we can overcome a lot of the challenges. And she just said it with a childlike simplicity. And so I think from what I've seen, there are 3 levels of targets that can help you overcome the hard and kind of put it into a certain frame. So I'll use a jiu-jitsu analogy to kind of like bring this home. So, I'm sure you've seen this, Alex. People that come to training and they just want to win every round of training. That's their main focus. Does their progress usually skyrocket or stall?
Stall.
Yeah. So that's the first thing. It's like if you just have a very short-term external target, whether you're competing against others or just chasing a specific kind of goal, first off, it will cause your results to stagnate because you're trying to protect your ego. You're not really open to challenging yourself. So also a lot of these guys that stall, they don't make it past blue belt, if that, because they're so concerned with winning right now that whenever that doesn't happen, it just adds a sense of pressure and anxiety and just makes it all unpleasant. And they don't want to keep playing anymore. Like in business, this is also the same thing, that a lot of times we have this specific, like income goal for this quarter or whatever it may be. And so that everything that goes against that all of a sudden feels really frustrating and annoying. And people kind of lose their momentum. This is when they say they hit burnout, whatever it may be. First off, am I making sense just with that first short-term external target?
So my understanding, if I do repackage that in a different way, would be if you're optimizing towards winning every game, whether it's sports, business, etc.
Yep.
That there's probably some default ceiling in terms of the levels of the game that you're playing with. Maybe a better way to say it is, it's easy to win a smaller game than to risk losing in a more difficult or a higher level of the game. And so if you're optimizing towards winning exclusively, then the trade-off there is that you're likely going to stall your progress because you're playing at lower levels.
Yeah, and it's really well said. And I'll say beyond that, so like the next thing is to have longer-term external targets, not short-term external targets, but long-term. The reason is that, for example, my issue with jiu-jitsu, why I underperformed a lot of times in training, I was phenomenal. I was always going against the hardest training partners, and I always also was doing very well against people that were supposed to be at my level, whatever it may be. And the reason was because I had in my head, I really want to win the championships. So I had complete freedom in the training room to just go after it and not think okay, am I hitting my target or not? I didn't have that added pressure. Now, the problem with that was that I still had that pressure at the tournaments. And that's when I would underperform. So what I'm saying is when you have a very short-term external target, everything feels like there's a lot of pressure on it because you're just trying to hit this target. However, if your goal is a longer term, I want to get this company one day to da-da-da-da, then okay, these are all learning lessons along the way. That's fine. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of phase two, having a long-term, as you're saying, there is limits to it, but having a long-term external target, because it just reduces a lot of that pressure. Because in the moment, you're okay, this is a learning process, okay. And you can have that beginner's mind where you're just free to do and not be in your head about it.
Right. So increasing the field of view, so to have that longer term view, so you can see the day-to-day iterations of the thing as being those micro learning lessons. But when you get tunnel focused on that thing in the short term, there's a greater risk of trying to win at all costs.
Beyond trying to win at all costs, you're just not going to perform as well. Yeah. Because everything's going to feel frustrating. Oh, why did I get tapped today? So example, jiu-jitsu. If your goal is the short term, I just want to feel really good and win this match today. If somebody taps you, you're going to get frustrated. And also you're going to feel a lot of pressure because you're I do not want to get tapped. However, if your long-term goal is to say, I want to be the best in the world, you're I want to expose, your focus is going to be, I want to expose every flaw in my technique in training today. I want to expose as many things as possible. In training, I would get tapped a lot by the black belts when I just start out, more than I could have if I just wanted to stall out, so to speak. If I just wanted to feel I only got tapped 2 times this round, then I could have stalled out. But because I just wanted to learn more, I was happy to be tapped out 6 times, 7 times. So it's I just got exposed 6 and 7 times, certain flaws in my technique. Great. Mm-hmm. I can improve on those. It was just about having that different lens about what do you want to accomplish and how that serves it.
Do you think a question that entrepreneurs could ask themselves might be to avoid zeroing in on the short term? Am I trying to win or am I trying to improve?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think for that requires a long-term vision. Because if you don't, and this is what happens a lot of times, people, they don't have a long-term vision of what they want. So they're just looking right now, this quarter, are we winning or are we losing? Mm-hmm. And that's when they get sucked into it. And a lot of times I get, messages from people saying, I feel very frenzied. That's usually why that is. Because you don't have the perspective in which to put things in. It's just I don't really know what I want to do. I'm just doing things. I want to make more money than this person. This person's doing well, but I should be doing that well. And it's this kind of frenzy. If you have a long-term target, and even if let's say a product launch fails or a marketing launch fails, whatever it may be, and you're okay, but this is part of the process to get to this ultimate goal. then it doesn't sap you as much. It's still not obviously the best thing, but you're like, okay, cool. This is a learning lesson. I'm supposed to have these. This is part of the game. But
Right.
because you have that picture of what the bigger game is.
Do you find that this creeps in at a certain stage of the sort of business ladder? I'm assuming that for most people jumping into a new arena for the first time, they've likely got some kind of a beginner's mindset. I don't know what I'm doing, and I'll work things out as I go. As they start to get some accomplishments, whether it's ego, identity, etc. So in jiu-jitsu, it's like the blue belts who still out of blue belt.
The blue belt titles.
Right? Yeah, so they get their blue belt. Great. I know jiu-jitsu a little bit. And rather than learning from all the belts above, they just want to smoke every white belt that comes through for their first session. Or in business, maybe they reach 6 figures. So like their ability to pay rent or provide for themselves is now met. But they're unwilling, or there's a fear about business failures, setbacks, etc., which stops them from reaching more.
Yeah, absolutely. So I first saw it in jiu-jitsu, like you said, at the blue belt level. I just thought it was something that I had figured out, this blue beltitis thing. But it's the Dunning-Kruger effect. It affects everyone in life. Like we have this field where all of a sudden we feel a little bit competent, and then that causes us to be confused and think we actually know everything. So our ego kind of like shells up and wants to protect that. And now, beyond that, I think is like what you said. It's the biggest thing is that they don't want to ask for help anymore. They don't want to feel like they don't know.
Right.
I mean, like one of the best documentaries I ever saw on Netflix was from Quincy Jones. He's a multi, I think like won 27 Grammys. He's one of the biggest producers. And his daughter asks him at one point, Dad, how come you were so comfortable like asking for help and like getting all these people to work with you? And he just calmly said, my goals were too big to have an ego. And I thought that was so profound. And like when your goals are small, they're short term, then your ego is going to pop up. When your goals are so big and so long term that you recognize it's completely ridiculous for me to not ask for help, because there's no way I can achieve this where I currently am, all of a sudden it frees you up to ask for help and to have less of an ego.
Could this be compounded externally through our environments where not just are we struggling to fully understand our own identity as we gain high degrees of competency in whatever arena, but that our external environment, when you're the student in a new thing, it's very easy to turn up to jiu-jitsu class, to a business workshop and say, I'm new, I don't know anything.
Yeah.
And there's almost like a get out of jail free card because you're the student. Maybe that goes into this valley where you're no longer the student, yet you're far from being a domain expert. Does that gap in maybe external social dynamics or just trying to understand how your identity fits into a larger environment, does that sort of potentially compound this?
I don't know. Tell me if I'm answering correctly what you meant by this. But I think a big part of it is that the martial arts, I think one of the beauty in them is the belt system, because it actually shows you're not a black belt until you are a black belt. And then it also shows you're just a first degree black belt or a second degree black belt. And there's also competition. And I think that's one of the beauties in the martial arts, why people get to have a white belt mentality, because it's literally so clear you're a white belt. And why it's so helpful for some CEOs to come into jiu-jitsu and just start out and they're like, oh, okay, I'm a white belt here. And it gives them permission to feel like a white belt, because it really is. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, this mentality is helpful here. Maybe I can also adopt it into business where it's needed. Does that kind of answer what you're going for?
It does.
Yeah, I think I actually, this is not my home office. I'm visiting, but in my home office, I have a giant sign in front of my desk actually to remind me. It says, keep a white belt mentality. It's supposed to be fucking hard. There's something that I have there every day to remind me that. Because I think we're all susceptible to the ego of we get some success, whatever it may be, and all of a sudden we want to shell up and feel like an expert or that we know something. That is I think one of the biggest. Sorry, go for it.
Oh, sorry, I'm going to cut you off. Is there a trait, like a behavioral trait, or even a soundbite that you've picked up on, which is a signal that the individual is essentially trying to win at a smaller game rather than being open to progression by playing a more advanced game?
It's a great question. So when I look at it inversely, of like what are the people that I see that are really wanting to go to the next level, it's usually a blend of an extreme desire to achieve more with an extreme humility and curiosity. Like the clients I have that are like, they see the fastest growth trajectory, they have those two things. They have an extreme desire for growth and an extreme where it's almost like it takes me aback sometimes. I'm like, it's inspiring to me. I'm like, these guys are so curious and humble. And they're so open to just saying like, I don't know this thing, that I leave those sessions uninspired. Like, I need to do more of that. So I think inversely, it's when someone is just like, no, I get it. Or they don't want to ask for help. They don't want to put their hand up.
Right.
It's like, I don't want to knock on doors anymore. I don't need the answers. When it really just, I want to protect my ego from getting no's.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer it?
It does. One of the things that I've picked up on, which I wasn't really conscious of until this conversation, was when you are the domain expert and you're trying to coach, educate the other individual, rather than receive the feedback, they start looking for like surface level excuses. So an example might be, hey, Bob, you should have done X instead of Y. And rather than Bob saying, great, how would I do that? Or how they will start to go, yeah, but the reason why I did X was for all these reasons, which is an indication that whether it's subconscious or not, that they're reacting defensively to what should be pretty easy to understand information. And it's unlikely they would have responded in the same way if it was day one, week one. If it was day one, week one, I'm like, great, that's a new way for me to improve the skill. So when I catch people, rather than internalizing the feedback and trying to work through how they're going to habitualize that behavior moving forwards, they start to make excuses for themselves to deflect the feedback as opposed to receive it. So it's essentially like a deflection rather than a reception. And that's one thing I picked up on in my direction.
So question, when you notice that, what's your intervention tool? Like, how do you override that with them?
What I try to do, not always successfully, is based on the context of the conversation, is try to reestablish an understanding or an appreciation that there's a knowledge gap. Because if I can get them back focused on the fact there is a knowledge gap, you are not the fastest runner on the athletics team and you need to be the fastest runner. Now they're more open to receiving information because I've created an open loop in their brain. They want to close that loop. Like, what are the things I need to be doing to get that position? Yeah. But so that's my...
Can I just pause you for a second?
Yeah, please.
So what I'm hearing, what you're saying is I establish in their head, there is a long-term goal that we want to accomplish here. So stop just trying to protect yourself in the short term. The short-term goal right now is always going to be for you to protect your ego. But by me establishing a long-term goal in their head, a long-term external target, then that overrides this short-term thing and they're open to it. I mean, and I think that's the goal for us internally as well. If we can have these longer-term external targets, they override a lot of the ego stuff.
Yes.
Now, to kind of like bridge it into the next section, while that overrides the ego of me wanting to be seen as great right now, these long-term targets still create a lot of pressure on us. Because what if I don't meet these targets? What does that mean about me? And like for me, for example, like I had a long-term target that I wanted to be the world champion in jiu-jitsu, and that allowed me complete freedom in the actual the training room. But in competition, it would cause me to underperform. It's like, oh shit, this is actually the moment, so to speak. And that's where these external goals usually hit a limit. And it comes from different angles. It's like I've seen this also with clients, with friends, that they have an external goal, they kind of reach it, and then they're like, man, my life is, I don't know how to, I don't have that boost anymore. I just feel like I'm acting out of integrity with myself. I'm not being the kind of person I'm proud of. Like I'm just kind of flailing around, whatever it may be. And the way to the finally, I think, rung of this ladder to override that is to have an internal target. So for me in jiu-jitsu, this shifted at purple belt. At purple belt, and up until then, I kept wanting to win the tournaments. And I remember there was one time where I flew to Brazil and my flights, I had a couple connections. One of them got canceled and I got stuck. And I basically arrived in Rio at the airport at like 5 a.m. And the tournament was supposed to start at 8 a.m. But like very low likelihood that I would even make the tournament. And I probably should have signed up for a tournament my first day at Rio. But there was a very low likelihood that I would actually make it there. So I just honestly, I went to the place I had, the Airbnb, and I just stayed there. And that week, I met one guy who was an American guy, and we chatted. And he said to me, "You know what, dude? I think you should have went to that tournament." And I was like, "Okay." He's like, "You probably wouldn't have won, but you could have gotten an opportunity to test yourself. And if you would have wanted that, also a lot of the things that like all of a sudden would have been a fun opportunity to really test yourself, but all the deck is stacked against you." And for whatever reason, I like that made everything click. And from then on, when I went into tournaments, even if I didn't sleep well, even if I didn't eat well, even if I didn't get the right warm up, the prep for it before wasn't great, I was in a great headspace because I said, "Great, this is an opportunity for me to test myself, especially when the deck is stacked against me." And when doing that, obviously my performance was much, much better than worrying about like, how will I perform today? Will I win? And I think the way this correlates to life in general is that it can make a lot of these obstacles feel purposeful instead of just annoying and frustrating. Like when we're trying to achieve big things, there will inevitably be obstacles. However, if we see the purpose behind it, because we are aspiring to be of a certain virtue, a certain level of courage, of resilience, whatever, and be internal things, then all of a sudden, this is actually a wanted part of the process. It's not just a setback or a frustration point. Like, okay, great, I get to have this here. This is a gift. I get to become the person who's courageous, who gets to overcome things. And I think that's really the final rung of the ladder, what I've experienced myself and also what I've seen in a lot of clients when you shift to an internal target.
I've got a similar anecdotal story where thankfully in hindsight, I chose the higher path. It was prior to my first powerlifting competition, and it was a deadlift only competition. So you're only performing 3 attempts at a deadlift. That competition was on a Saturday, and I'd always been pretty strong, but this is my first time of committing to a competition with an audience and whether I came first or last. So I had that some extra pressure attached to this. On the Wednesday before the Saturday competition, I was helping a friend move house and sort of did a backflip down some slippery stairs and ended up with this huge hematoma on my leg and couldn't walk. So this is 3 days before I'm trying to put my body under peak performance. Yep. But for me, there was no doubt in my mind whether I was going to compete or not. I knew that my performance would be diminished just structurally. But because it was such a significant moment for myself to put myself under that additional pressure, I viewed taking the excuse of I'm injured, so I'm not going to participate, as more of a personal cost than potentially coming last in the competition. And as I had people around me during that 3 or 4 day period, understanding my injury and so on, I recognized that the people that I aspired in some way to be more like were the people who kind of gave me like a gentle head nod, like, you can't walk, but you're still going to compete in a powerlifting competition in 3 days. Cool. And then the people who I maybe didn't aspire to be like were the people who were more vocal in trying to maybe assist or influence me to sort of accept the L, don't compete and, wash up for the next one. So, I think that maybe different personalities have yeah, sure.
What do you think enabled you to have that frame of mind? Because how old were you then?
Oh, we're being mid-20s.
What do you think enabled you to recognize, like in that moment, like, no, this is an opportunity for me to push through and do something I'm proud of? Was it other people in the environment kind of sending these kind of messages? Like what? Because that's not the natural default state, as we're saying. So what do you think enabled you to do that?
I think it was that I'd had my own personal transcendent moments through facing adversity, both in sports and other areas of life, that I was just sort of so biased towards do the difficult thing that in some way, actually looking back on it now, I think it was actually like a low level of excitement, the fact that I was injured, like the fact that it just got that much harder.
Yeah.
To me was like, this is a personal journey. It's like my own sort of hero's tale. It's like a story I'm writing for myself, through myself, for myself. It was very much completely an internal motivation. Because of course, if I was focused on winning the competition, I wouldn't have competed.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting point because that's also on a principle level, like we face failure, we constantly try to optimize just for feeling good about ourselves. We recognize feedback from the world that doesn't actually benefit us and actually causes pain. And then we adjust our behaviors, basically from your story, from my story as well. And I think it's probably a process that everybody kind of has to go through, where naturally we set the short-term targets, external ones of looking good. Then we recognize that actually is not productive. And then we shift eventually at some point to some kind of like, oh, not everybody, but the people who really want to be elite are the people that have gotten the opportunity to be exposed to that way of thinking, recognize this is how you actually do that. You're not just frustrated, but this is how you overcome that. And you shift that internal thing, like, oh, this is my journey. This is what I want to do. I want to make myself a better version of myself, and so on. And again, I think like how we're using these analogy of, sports, weightlifting, martial arts, whatever it may be, is there is a beauty in how many lessons you get to learn there that can be applied to everywhere else in life, because it's just like a clear domain. You know what I mean? You get so many opportunities, like these competitions, they're so obvious and clear domains to challenge yourself. Or in business, like we don't have anything as clear. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But the lessons still carry through. That when you really want to just test yourself and challenge yourself, like I said, all of a sudden, like things feel better. And you end up getting a better result than if you were just going there like, I hope I can kind of win today despite my bruise.
And to pull that thread you just laid out of the connection between sports and business, obviously they are different domains, and sports is an easy way for us to communicate this because it's, as I said, it's quite clear. However, my personal opinion is that there's an absolute correlation, like the personality trait, I think, is almost universal as a domain. I would much prefer to have a business partner who's a person who does a difficult thing despite having the fear of failure, etc., in a sport domain, because I think they're more likely to be about it in business as well. So I'm actually very sensitive to people's personality traits with their health and fitness, and just general life behaviors in their private life. And I make judgments on that as to how they're going to perform in their business life. Because if they're overweight, depressed, and negative about everything in their personal life, that doesn't sound to me like a highly valuable business partner or employee to bring onto the team. So I think they are connected in some way. It's more about a personal standard you hold to yourself or not.
I agree. And I'll say something really interesting is that a lot of times people aren't aware of it. It's a weird thing where sometimes you have to remind somebody, and I do this a lot with clients or just people, like, I made at conferences and they're like, oh, I do this and I do that. Okay, like, so you're saying that you have this ability to do hard things, right? Why are you doing this hard thing? Oh, because I want to challenge myself. Like, cool. So you're saying you know how to do this kind of way of thinking. What if you did that in this level of business, applying it to this specific goal that you have? And it's weird that people are like, oh, that's so interesting. I didn't think about it like that. It's like, yeah. Sometimes you just have to remind people, like, you have this mentality over here in this part of your life. What if you already took this mentality that you spent a lot of time and effort building, and then just look at this part of life with that same mentality, that same mindset? And just reminding people that it's wild how much you could all of a sudden like just switch and they're like, oh, I didn't know I could just do that. I didn't think about it like that.
Yeah.
So like with the people that are already proven in some ways to say, hey, what if you just transfer this mindset to this arena? It goes a really, really long way. And it just shortcuts a lot of that stuff.
100%.
Cool. So now I want to move on to the strategic layer, kind of like what you were saying at the beginning. How do we make sure that we're not just doing hard things for the sake of hard things? And the first thing to do with that is to get clarity on actually what you want. And this is obviously the hardest part, like, because everything is a downstream effect from that. That you're not just aimlessly just doing hard things. Like, what do you want out of life? And this is both on an internal level, and then that creates an external level. Like, what needs to be there externally in order for me to feel this way? Whether it's sense of pride, accomplishment, virtue, whatever it is. Okay, like, how does that look like for me? For some people, it's $100 million company. For some people, it's a great relationship. For some people, it's great health. For some people, it's the trifecta, whatever it may be. And then saying to yourself, and this is like the stuff that we talk about in the book as well, like we all share, like, how do you find the most direct path to that? Like, what is the most direct path? That if you had to have somebody, you had to coach somebody else, and they would ask you, like, how could I do this if I had to as quickly as possible? You told them, do these things, regardless of how uncomfortable it feels. And then, like you basically said, once you have those things that you need to be doing, then the next step is like, okay, like, how do I frame this? Not as just a burden, like, man, this is so hard, this is so uncomfortable. Like, no. This is actually how I lead back to that internal sense of pride that I wanted to have. I'm going to view it as a gift. And I reframe these challenges as an intentional upgrade to myself. Like, this is how I actually get to be the kind of person I want to be. So I'm clear on the external things I need to accomplish and I need to be doing, but I view it through an internal target lens. Again, I'm not trying to do this thing. I'm not trying to win at this thing, but this is just a way for me. Like, it's kind of like a flank. It's like, this is not the mean. This is just a means, not the actual end. The end is a challenge and me getting to persevere through this and the kind of person I become because of that. So I said a bunch of stuff fast, but does that kind of add up?
It does. If the means is the challenge, is there advice you have as to how to ensure that? I think I personally suffer from like enjoying challenge and potentially creating unnecessary challenge. Is there a prompt that you have to help someone understand whether the challenge is helpful or not?
Yeah. So it's actually in the book, we talk about three performance traps, sorry. And one of them is to try to prove people wrong. And whenever we want to prove people wrong and we have something in our past where we want to prove it, we overcomplicate things. Whether it's to prove to them how capable we are or something that's to prove to ourselves how capable we are. And I was guilty of this as well. And again, I think the simplest way to override that, like, you don't have to do, years of therapy or whatever to unwind that. You can just externalize the problem. So just say, if somebody else needed to do this, needed to accomplish this goal, what would be the simplest and most effective way for them to do that? And then you do just that. So we don't add the extra feature to the product. We don't delay it. We don't, try to do this while also doing that just to show how capable we are. Once we externalize it, we get rid of a lot of our bullshit. Then the hard part is, now that we have a clear roadmap, is, okay, how do we avoid letting our bullshit slip in? But when, for example, in your situation, and this is everybody, myself included, anybody who wants to prove something as a point to prove, recognizing that virtue of courage or resilience is to say, I'm going to walk this direct path to success that I would tell somebody else. And whenever I feel that pinch or that desire to do other things, that's when I have to override that. Whenever I feel like, if I just do it like this, it's not going to seem as admirable or as great or whatever it may be, that's where I get to override that. And that's where in 30 years from now, I get to be proud of myself for not letting that part of me just wants to prove a point and actually isn't wise and isn't strategic, not actually run the show.
Mm-hmm.
So externalization, you know what the right thing is, and then you get to look at that as the opportunity to override that previous version of yourself.
Brilliant. I think this is why entrepreneurs need performance coaches, because if you cannot correctly articulate what the end goal is, it might feel like an admirable goal. If I could look back at my entrepreneurial career, for the longest time, I think I thought that I wanted to be successful financially. But that's not actually really what I wanted to do. I really wanted to be the hardest worker in the room, to pick the hardest fights in business and to win the hardest fights. And so when you find yourself toothless, punch drunk, and a bit lost, and you're wondering, how did I get here? It's like, well, you kind of engineered this. You were looking for the hardest fights and you got them. And so if I had had the benefit of a performance coach like you back in those days, I would have been able to get clearer on the goal and recognize that the patterns I was creating were not aligned to the goal of financial freedom, etc. And that actually I was running really fast. It's kind of like running a marathon and sprinting for the first 100 meters. It's like, I'm winning. Yeah. At the 200 meter mark, you're still winning. But my aperture wasn't increased to go, can I sustain this pace indefinitely? Of course, the answer was no. And then I found that out the hard way.
So what do you think caused the shift for you until you found that out the hard way?
You're finding out the hard way. Finding out the hard way. Pain. That's a challenge, is that you've got a false reinforcement. If the goal is to be winning and the starter's gun of the marathon goes and you sprint the first 100 meters, everyone around you might be telling you to slow down, be like, I'm winning at 200 meters. I'm still winning. And then you can start to convince yourself that you're built different and that this is too much, too intense for everybody else. But you're special. And what I realized is that whether or not there's the cadence of output, what I was doing was incredibly unsustainable, and I was acting in ways purely to win difficult fights, not necessarily to move a tangible metric forwards.
Yeah, you see what we're talking about winning, the definition of winning, whether that's internal or external. And whether it's a short-term external, like I just won this fight, but it's a short-term, like a long-term external of I want financial freedom, and versus an even deeper thing of internal targets of saying, I just want to become the best version of myself, who's calm, who's strategic, who's wise. Like if that was the goal consistently, the reminder that I want to be calm, strategic, and wise, a lot of that probably would have been mitigated.
100%.
There's a saying in corporate America, I'm probably botching this a little bit, but that everybody has two jobs. One is a job they actually are supposed to do, and other is a job of keeping a certain perception of how others see them doing their job. And while that, like, it sounds funny about a corporate, it's just human condition. We all are like that. And that's the real thing. A lot of times we set these external targets and we're just worried about how are people going to perceive us. However, when we set an internal target, it removes a lot of that. It removes both like how you called it, the mimetic desire. I think you said this in a couple episodes ago, of just like saying, oh, everyone's doing this, I should do that too. Or the pressure as well of how will people perceive me. I think that's the big performance boost. When all of a sudden it's an internal drive of why I should be doing this. It's like, oh, I want to do this. Oh, this is a challenge. You're great. I want to overcome it. I want to learn how to overcome it. I want to become the kind of person who learns to overcome these things. That's when your performance starts really shooting up. Like we talk about pressure lessens, the motivation actually rises because you can really see why it fits into what you're trying to do and who you're trying to become. And your performance just really goes on turbo with it. So I think that's the biggest thing, kind of. Yeah, sorry. So say like that's kind of the main point I wanted to get when challenges are expected and welcomed because you have an internal target of the kind of person you want to be, then they stop adding pressure and they actually add motivation because you get jazzed by it. Great, this is exactly what I was looking for. Like when I was on a low level, just trying to like find jiu-jitsu tournaments and be like, how can I challenge myself? When there were weird warm-up times when there was no warm-up area, whatever it may be, I was like, great, this is where I get to learn. And actually it increased my energy instead of just all of a sudden sapping me and causing me to be worried. And I think when you see this as well, if you have the right strategy, you've externalized it, you can just take combat, okay, if this one needs to get done, right, it's an opportunity. And that's how you keep it both tactical and let's call it like philosophical and performance-based.
That's awesome.
Cool. Any last thoughts or questions before we wrap up this episode, man?
No thoughts. My core takeaway from this conversation has been to continue to focus on the longer term and to be really, really specific with my goals, because your last soundbite just before about maintaining that focus on the end outcome of being the best version of myself. I know that sounds a bit cliche, but if you can maintain,
it doesn't sound cliche, man. Like, there's a beauty in the cliches. You know what I mean? Like, it's important.
Sure.
There's no need to dismiss that.
Sure.
It might sound corny or cheesy, not as cool as saying my goal is to make X amount of millions. But the weird paradox is that the more you focus on that, the more likely you're actually going to achieve what you want to achieve.
Yes. And if I can look back at my entrepreneurial journey to date, yes, so many of the unnecessary difficult battles were by me trying to engineer difficult fights, not necessarily trying to progress something forwards. And what I've learned through observation, conversations with other entrepreneurs, is that when they're in that mindset, they're talking about a specific challenge they're working through in very existential terms, which is a sign that, again, that they're focused on the short term. Because I want to win, I want to get the highest open rate on this email campaign, I want to optimize this lead cost, I want to improve this sales metric. But if they're focused on how do I become the most effective, efficient entrepreneur possible in a long term, they probably wouldn't be talking about this near term issue unless it is truly existential with the same language, which is a signal to how much gravity it's holding inside of them in the same way. So it's something I've been able to observe in other people and observe in myself. And so now I'm starting to build a bit of a skill set that if I see that pattern emerging in my own thoughts and my own language, I've got a better pattern recognition to hopefully see it for what it is. Say, no, that's a low way of thinking. So old version of me, and going forward, I need to have a clearer articulation of what the goal is and a longer term view. That's going to give me better clarity into how significant this minor challenge might be.
Yeah, I think you said something very interesting there about how people make it existential. So I'll share kind of my framework for how I do this internally with myself. The beauty of starting out as a white belt in jiu-jitsu, and the way I did it, I already had, like, let's say, some successes in life, was that I didn't feel like I was, I don't know, a flawed person. Like, I wasn't like a bad person. I was just a very bad jiu-jitsu practitioner because I was a white belt. It was that I was extremely flawed in this domain of life. I had a ton of flaws that needed to be exposed so they can be polished and improved and so on the path to like blue belt, purple belt, brown, black belt, and so on. And what helps me a lot is to simplify these things and to make it myself to not fall into these called performance traps in business, is to also just say, I have a lot of flaws in business still. I have a lot of flaws in coaching. I'm a very flawed coach still. I'm a very flawed business person still. And all of a sudden, it's going to say, okay, like, we're just trying to improve this thing, not about me. It doesn't all of a sudden put my sense of ego and my sense of self into threat. And I think, like what you were saying about, you know, someone who has their act together in life in general, whether it's health, fitness, relationships, whatever it may be, the more you have the rest of your life in order, the easier it is to also just detach from one part of it and say, this is just where I'm extremely flawed. Like, I do a lot of work to have a great relationship with my wife and with my son. It's like, it's easier because of that to like just look at business and be like, this doesn't define me. And like, I'm very flawed here still. Great. Let's expose more of these flaws so I can eventually get better. And I think just looking at it in that kind of silo, this is not who I am, but this is a part of me, a part of my skill set. It's a skill of mine that is very flawed, whether it's jiu-jitsu, it's business, it's leadership, whatever it may be. All of a sudden, it creates a kind of playful mentality where they go, oh, okay, this is cool. This is a problem to solve. It's nothing about me that I'm flawed. And then my ego doesn't spike. And I don't focus on short-term external targets or even the long-term ones. Just like, okay, cool. How can I use this tool of business to help me develop into a better person? Just use it as a game.
Yeah.
I think if people can silo that, the more they can do it. And the more they say, okay, of course I'm flawed in this thing. I'm not the best in the world. And even the best in the world is probably still flawed at this thing. Then the easier it becomes, the less pressure there is just to look at it as a problem, solve it, keep moving forward, not having ego first that actually ruin your performance.
What's your reaction to a statement? This is a practice or a habit more than it is a single epiphany or like a brain break moment. In the same way that meditation is a process of understanding that you are not your thoughts, and you're developing this ability internally to say, that was a thought I had that doesn't define me as an individual. Mm-hmm. That this is an ongoing process. And yes, you level up over time, but it's not as if you listen to this podcast or read a book and say, oh, great, okay, I'm fixed now and I'll forever think differently moving forward. Probably not. Probably needs a repeat process. And I think that's a benefit of having high-level performance coaching, is that you've got people with batteries included, how to navigate this, how to prompt you in a way to see beyond your own biases or blind spots and get you closer to your version of truth, as opposed to false truths, which are giving you either sort of comfort or appeasing some emotional gap. So yeah, I highly encourage anyone who's listening to this that's experienced this performance gap to consider performance coaching, to apply for the elite, and to see how they can habituate a higher level of internal dialogue with themselves, because I've certainly benefited from it. Yeah, I think it's very
appreciate it. Yeah, and I think it's
practice.
Yeah, it's about having some kind of external forcing function. Like for me, I'm still, like I said at the very beginning, I still have that sign right in front of my desk to remind me to keep a white belt mentality. Like the clients that I work with, they're actually forcing functions from me that they're inspiring the way they are. And like, oh, I need to do more of that. So whatever way it is, whether it's, you know, performance coach, whether it's a mastermind buddy, whether it's someone you really respect, whatever it is, like it's human nature to, you know, to revert back to our ego state. That's where we have to do these external things that are in our environment that force us to remember, like, get out of your head. Stop doing that thing that a part of you naturally wants to do and protect your ego, and act with a certain level of virtue and long-term thinking about who you want to become.
Awesome.
On that note, we'll wrap it up for today. Thank you very much, Alex. It was a great episode. And thank you guys for listening.
man.
We'll see you on the next week.